Today I want to share with you how to can pears with no sugar. And this technique can be applied to any type of fruit. And if you're new to water bath canning, I'm going to walk you through the entire process from start to finish. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Now, when it comes to water bath canning, the first thing that you're going to need is something to water bath can in. Now, I'm using an electric water bath canner, but if you don't have one of these, don't worry. All you need is some type of stock pot. And then into your stock pot, you're going to want to be able to put in some type of rack. Now, this is the rack that came with my electric water bath canner. But if you have something like this that you're, for cooling cakes or cookies or whatever the case may be, and it can fit down into your stock pot, that'll work great. But if you don't have anything like this, don't worry. You can actually make your own rack by using canning rings. And generally to do that, the regular mouth, the regular sized canning rings work best. And I'll overlay a little video where I show you how I do that. I've shared this with you. If you've seen any of my other canning videos, I've shared with you how to do this. But you just take regular mouth canning rings and you loop them together, and you have a rack and you're all set. So you don't have to worry if you don't have something like this. A stock pot, some canning rings, make a rack out of it, and you're ready to water bath can. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this rack down into my water bath canner. I've already got some water in here and I'm just bringing it up to temp. Let me put that back down. But now let's go over everything else that you're going to need. Most important, you're going to need jars. And you're going to want canning jars. These are wide mouth quart-sized jars, but you can also use pint-sized jars. I generally recommend when you're canning fruit to use some nice wide mouth jars because it just makes it easier to get the fruit in and out. The next thing you're going to need are canning lids. And these always have to be new. You don't want to reuse canning lids. And if they came with your jars and your bands, some people call them rings, you're all set. But if you need to buy lids, they just come in a little package like this. And in our case, we're going to use wide mouth lids because we're using wide mouth jars. And I know I've heard from many of you that trying to find lids right now has been a little difficult. Generally, during canning season, canning supplies can become a little sparse, and especially now, given what we're going through with this virus and whatnot, and people are doing a lot of home canning, canning lids can be difficult to find. I was lucky, I found some at my grocery store. Every time you're grocery shopping, just check the canning section or any of the big box stores that have canning sections. Just check them and see if they're in stock. But a tip that I want to share is whenever you go grocery shopping, once all of these canning supplies get back into stock, just pick up one pack of wide lids or one pack of regular size lids. And that way you build up a nice little supply and you never have to worry about running out of lids or not being able to find them when they're out of stock. Next, you're going to need canning bands or rings. Now, some people call them bands, some people call them rings. But now you can reuse these. So these do not need to be discarded. They just need to be washed well after they've been used, and you want to make sure that they don't have any rust or any damage to them. But as long as they're in good condition, your rings can be reused. Next, you're going to want some kind of ladle, which makes it easy to get your fruit and your liquid into your jars. And then you're going to want some type of funnel. And then you're going to want a jar lifter, and then you're going to want a debubbler, and this is a clever debubbler because it has little graduations here that help you to know what headspace you've got in your jar, because depending on what you're canning, there are different headspace, which we'll talk about when we get to the point of filling our jars. And then next, if you want a little jar lifter like this, it's got a little magnet on the end. This comes in handy. But given the new rules regarding canning lids, which we'll talk about in a minute, this isn't necessarily 100% required, because older canning ways would have these soaking in warm water, maybe water that had been brought to a boil, but then allowed to just cool a little bit. And then you would take your little magnetic tool and you would go into the water and lift out your canning jar, or your canning lid using this tool. But now canning sources say that if your lids have simply been washed in warm soapy water and allowed to dry, and they're nice and clean, and you keep them clean up until the time you're ready to put them down onto your jar, you don't need to keep them in that warm or hot water while you're waiting to put them on your jar. And the reason is, you will notice that a canning lid has this little sort of orange colored area all around the ring. And this is actually slightly rubberized. And if this is in hot water or boiled, or just soaking even in a warm or hot water for too long, it can start to degrade that rubber. And then you can't get a good seal on your jar. So now it's simply recommended wash, dry, keep them clean, and then when you're ready to put them onto your jar, you're all set. Now, I don't know exactly how many canning jars I'm going to need to can my pears, but my canner can hold 7 quart-sized jars, so I'm going to go ahead and put 7 into my canner. And what you want to do is, I've just been having this on a little bit of a simmer, and I'm going to take my jars with my jar lifter, and then I'm going to put them down into this nice warm water. Now, as to your jars, what do you want them, what state do you want them to be in? They do not need to be sterilized, although you can if you want. All you need to do is to make sure that they've been washed with nice warm soapy water, rinsed well, and dried. And the reason that we're putting them down into this nice warm water is because we want our jars to be very warm, because when we go to put the hot water in our jars, because we're not going to be using a sugar syrup, but we will be canning them with water, and that's got to be hot, and the pears are going to be hot. So you want to make sure that the jars are hot as well so they don't crack. Now, before I put my last jar in, I just want to mention something to you that I had done previously. As you're putting your jars in, first check them over. You can just take a cloth so that in case there is any nick on here, you don't cut yourself. And just go over the rim and make sure that there's no chip on this rim, because that is very important to create a good seal when you're canning. And then also just inspect your jar and make sure that there's no crack. The other day when I was canning some jam, I was inspecting my jars before I put them into the water bath canner, and the rim was fine, but I noticed it had a crack in it. So these things happen. So just check all your jars before you go ahead and put them into your canner. So I've got all my jars in the canner, and now do not worry. They don't need to be completely submerged or anything like that at this point. It's fine if the water is just right at about the rim of the jars. It's more important and actually required that once we go to can our pears, then we want the 1 inch or 2 inches above the lid of the jars. So now we'll just let those jars sit in that nice hot water, and then we'll start preparing our pears. Well, I've got my pears here, and I have somewhere between 15 and 16 pounds of pears, so I think that that's probably going to fill 6 of my quart-sized jars. But I've got that 7th one there just as my insurance policy in case I do wind up having more. And then over here I've got a stock pot. I've got it filled halfway with water, and I just put in a little squirt of lemon juice, just a little squirt, not a lot. And that is, as I peel these and slice them and put them into the water, this will keep them from browning. Now for the acid that you put in here, you can certainly use a little fresh lemon juice if you want. You could also use the various products that are sold by the canning companies. You could use they'll sell a little bit of citric acid or something called Fruit Fresh, and you can put a little bit of that in your water, whatever the case may be. The reason that I'm using bottled lemon juice is because we need bottled lemon juice when we get to the canning process. And the reason is we need to guarantee the level of acidity of our pears in order to water bath can them. You can only water bath can high acid foods. So you have to make sure that the acid is just right to prevent any development of botulism. Now you could certainly pressure can these, but that requires special equipment and so on and so forth. And I know some people are worried about pressure canning. And so I wanted to show you how to do this with water bath canning. So you're going to need, and the reason we use bottled lemon juice is because this is what is recommended by most canning recipes as well as the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And they recommend that you put 1 tablespoon of a bottled lemon juice into a pint-sized jar, or in our case, using quart-sized jars, we're going to need 2 tablespoons of the bottled lemon juice. And then that will guarantee the correct level of acidity in order to water bath can fruit. And the bottled lemon juice has a more guaranteed level of acidity than what you might squeeze from a lemon. Every lemon might be slightly different, but the acidity in bottled lemon juice is guaranteed. Now when it comes to pears, you want to make sure they're ripe but still firm, because overripe pears, and the same would apply to apples and peaches and nectarines as well, do not can up as well. The final product is not as nice as if you start with fruit that is firm. If your fruit is overripe, your end product tends to be on the mushy side. Now I'm going to peel my pears and then I'm going to cut them in half because I'm going to can them in halves, but you could certainly slice them as well if you wanted. And for removing the core inside, once we slice the pear in half, a melon baller comes in very handy. But in the event that you don't have one of these, no problem. If you have a serrated spoon, they're usually used for eating grapefruits, this works very well too. Now I also want to mention, we're going to put these, as I said, into this stock pot that's about halfway filled with water to keep them from discoloring. But we're also going to cook the pears. Now we're not going to cook them very long. We're going to cook them for about 5 minutes. And the reason is a slightly cooked pear also cans up better than a raw pack. So I'm going to start peeling my pears and cutting them in half, getting them into the acidulated water, and then we'll move on to the next step. Well, I simmered my pears for about 5 minutes, and I actually wound up slicing them because they were so large that I felt they were just a little too large to go in just half size into my jars. So I peeled them, sliced them, and I let them simmer on medium for about 5 minutes. Brought them up to a boil and then let them simmer for about 5 minutes. Now, don't throw away any of your scraps. Don't throw away your peels or your cores, anything that you have. You can use the pears to make pear scrap vinegar, and I've got a lot of videos where I show you how to make vinegar with fruit scraps, and I'll be sure to put the links in the description below or in the iCards. And the other thing you can do is save those scraps and put them in with your vegetable scraps. And you can use those when you make bone broth because they're very rich in vitamins and minerals. Now we're going to carefully take our jars out of our canner, and they've just been sitting in this nice hot water. Be careful because that is very hot water. And then what we're going to do is take a clean paper towel, and we're just going to go around the rim of the jar just to check again to make sure that it's got no nicks, that nothing happened to it when it was just sitting in the canner. Now we're going to use this cloth again with some white vinegar when we go to clean the jar. So just keep that handy. And then we're going to go ahead and get our funnel, and we're going to start loading our pears in. And you want to just try to first get as many pears as you can. We're going to be using the liquid, the water that the pears were cooked in. But first we want to see if we can get as many pears as possible in here. Now we're going to fill this up to the point where we leave a 1/2 inch headspace. But before I get right up to that, I'm just going to go ahead and add in my 2 tablespoons of the bottled lemon juice. 1. Yep. 2. Excellent. Alrighty. And then I think we can sneak in maybe another 2 pear slices in there. Just get those in. Be careful, they're nice and hot. And then we'll start to fill our liquid up to that 1/2 inch headspace. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go around, this is our debubbler, and we just want to go around the jar to make sure that we release any air bubbles, any air that might be trapped in there. And then this way we'll know that when we get to that 1/2 inch headspace that we pretty much have any air bubbles released. Alrighty. Well, and then we'll use this little doohickey here to measure to make sure that we've got the right headspace. Let me use my funnel. So each one of these little indents is 1/4 inch. So we're just going to go to the second one, and that's perfect. We're right at a 1/2 inch headspace. Now that we've got this at our 1/2 inch headspace, all we need to do is take our paper towel that's got the white vinegar on it, just give this a cleaning to make sure there's no pear, the natural pear juice from cooking the pears in water, or any pear, a little bit of pear fruit that might have gotten stuck there. That looks good. Now we'll go ahead and get our lid that's been kept clean, and then we're going to go ahead and put our ring on. And now what we want to do with the ring is just put this what's called fingertip tight, and basically you just go to where you feel some resistance and then you tighten it a little more. But you do not want to do any brute force. And the reason is, I'm going to take a close-up so you can see exactly what I'm doing. The reason you do not want to use any brute force is that the ring or the band is only there to hold the lid in place during the water bath canning process. When you put this in your canner, a little bit of oxygen or air is going to come out of the jar. You might even see little bubbles when you first start to put your jars into your canner. And that air coming out is a good thing, because what makes canned food safe is that you get out as much air as possible, and then when you take your can or your jar out of the canner and it returns to room temperature and the lid seals and you get the ping, where the little dot in the middle becomes depressed, that keeps all the air out, all the air is gotten out, and then it keeps any new air from coming in, and then that keeps the food from spoiling. So that's why it's very important not to do this with brute force. You want there to be a little bit of give so that any air that's trapped in here can be released during the water bath canning process. Now that we've got our ring, our band fingertip tight, we're going to go ahead and use our jar lifter and then carefully lower our jar down into our water bath canner. Well, I filled 6 jars with pears. I've got a few little pear slices left, but not enough to fill that 7th jar. But in any event, I've got them all into the water bath canner. I've got an inch of water above the lids. I'll take a picture and I'll overlay so you can see what that looks like. And now I'm going to bring it up to a boil. And once it comes up to a boil, a full rolling boil, we're going to boil these for 25 minutes. If you're canning your pears in pint-sized jars, then it'll be 20 minutes. But keep in mind, this is for 0 to 1,000 in elevation. If you have a different elevation, you then need to adjust for your elevation. You need to adjust the time at which you process your jars based on your elevation. Now, a great site for finding out exactly how many minutes you need to process your jars based on your elevation is the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And they have everything you ever need to know about canning, both water bath canning and pressure canning. And I'll be sure to add this into the recipe when I put this over on my website, but I'll just review it quickly here. As I said, 0 to 1,000 feet in elevation is 20 minutes for pints, but 25 minutes for quarts. So I'm going to go ahead and put my lid on this and keep an eye on it, watch it for when it comes up to a boil, and then we'll set the timer, well, I'll set my kitchen timer for 25 minutes. Now I just want to mention that National Center for Home Food Preservation, which has all the information that you need for pressure canning or water bath canning, it's excellent. But if you're looking for variations, like nice recipes, today we're just doing, this is a nice recipe, but we're just doing basic canned fruit, in our case canned pears without sugar. But whenever you're looking for recipes, if you're new to canning, there's lots of canning books. And this is just a few that I have, and you can never go wrong with Ball. They have wonderful canning books. And this is the complete book of home preserving. This is an older one, so keep your eye out for this at used bookstores, because I've always seen copies of this at used bookstores, because this has been out maybe since the 1990s, I'm not 100% sure, but it's been out a while. So that's one. And then another one is, this is their newer version of this one, the all-new Ball Book of Canning and Preserving. And this is great. They have not just canning recipes, but I think in here there's even some fermentation. So that's kind of neat. Let me just take a quick look I have a lot of cookbooks and I lose track. Yes, they do. They have a chapter on fermenting. So that's excellent. So this is a good source. And then if you're totally new to canning and you want to just have some very basic, as they say, back to basic recipes, this is just a nice little paperback, again by Ball, and it's called Back to Basics, a foolproof guide to canning jams, jellies, pickles, and more. So this is a great book, especially because it's just I always recommend this one for people who are new to water bath canning, because this is very easy to follow and the recipes are very basic and very easy. So definitely keep this in mind, keep your eyes open for it. I'll put links in the description below, but as I said, definitely if you have a used bookstore, look for this one, because you're probably going to find it. And it's got a lot of basic recipes in it too. Well, I let this boil or process for 25 minutes. Now we're just going to take off the lid. I've turned it off, and we'll take off the lid. Be careful when you do this, because a lot of steam will often come out. And then we're just going to leave our jars in there for 5 minutes, and then we'll take them out. Now, I just want to mention, while we're waiting for those 5 minutes, any water that you have left over that you cooked your pears in, don't discard it. It actually makes a very flavorful, like a flavored water. It has a very mild pear flavor, and it's very tasty. It really is very tasty. It's very like you had put pears in water. And so don't throw that out, because you can enjoy that as a refreshing beverage, or you can use it as a base for soups. I would think there would be a lot of different things you could do with it. So definitely don't discard that. And then any pears that you had that couldn't fit into one of your jars, whatever size jar you were using, this just wasn't quite enough for a quart-size jar. So anything you have left over, you're going to want to refrigerate. Well, I let these sit in the hot water for 5 minutes, and now we'll get ready to take them out. But make sure that you have something soft, like a maybe double folded dish towel, or one of these dish drain type mats, that you can put dishes on when you wash them. You want something that's cushioned, and also something that'll protect your jar from being placed on a cold counter, because a cold counter could cause your jar to crack. And you don't want that to happen. And you want to give it some nice cushion and sort of a cozy place to land. Now what you want to do is keep these very straight, and then you want to just bring them over to their landing area and let them sit there. And then what we'll be listening for is the ping, when the little button on top of the lid depresses down, and it makes a little sound like bing. Now you'll want to leave your jars like this for 24 hours with the rings on. And then at that point, you'll probably, as these are cooling, you'll start to hear the ping. And then after 24 hours though, you want to make sure that each one of them has had the little button on top be depressed. And that way you know that you've gotten a good seal. At that point, you want to remove your rings and store these in your pantry or wherever you store them. And the reason you want to remove the rings is because if for any reason the seal breaks, maybe because of a wide temperature swing or the various reasons that can happen, the ring still being on the jar will cause it to possibly reseal. But at that point, oxygen, air will have gotten into your jar, and even though it's resealed, there's now oxygen in there, air, and it could cause the food in there to spoil. So this way, if you remove your rings and any of these seals break, you'll see it immediately. Now, definitely if you were giving these as a gift, you could leave the ring on, and then you could tell the person to whom you're giving the gift to remove the ring when they store it, and then they can just keep it handy. So when they do open their pears, they can use the lid and the ring to store it in their refrigerator. Or you could give them, along with this jar, you could give them one of the plastic storage lids. So when they do go to enjoy these, they can, after they open it, they can discard the lid and just use the plastic storage lid when they put them in the fridge. If you'd like to learn more about water bath canning, including how to can tomatoes and pickles and make jams and marmalade, be sure to click on this video over here, where I have a playlist that shows you how to do all of that and more. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.